Joe.
Blacula.
Our young brothers and sisters that are in what you call the gangs, they're a very strange breed. Parents, you've never seen anything like your children before. They're a different breed. And you know why they're different? Because they represent the age of fulfillment. And you represent the age of hope. You've always hoped for freedom. Hope that one day you'll be delivered. Your children are born to bring into reality what you hope for. And as fulfillment don't look nothing like hope, your children are from you, but they don't really spiritually resemble anything like you. You can't get them to go to school because they know the white man's school is a failure. You can't drag them to church because they've had enough of that. They're out in the street waiting for the call. They are warriors. Look at the name they call themselves, the warlords. What do the warlords know that you don't know, that Reagan knows? Reagan knows it's the time of war. The warlords know that it's got to be war in order to get what rightfully belonged to you. Listen good now. El-Rukn. 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 Do you know what that means? El-Rukn means the corner. And the stone at Mecca, which is called the cornerstone, is El-Rukn. And that cornerstone is a black stone. And that black stone represents the Muhammad of the Holy Quran, who would come up from the dead in the last day. But that stone is a righteous stone, but it's a stone of stumbling. Disciples, look at the name, the disciples. A disciple is one who has disciplined himself to the order of a superior. The village vice lords. See the word Lord? A Lord is a ruler. Jesus was the Lord, but when he leaves in charge a vice lord. A Lord that's under him. Look at it, brother. All the terms are there, but the actions need to be brought up to where they should be. Now, what the white man wants to see is village vice lords and the warlords and the El-Rukn and the disciples kill each other. They will put people among us to foment gang warfare. Beloved black brother and sister, let us not do this. Let us not let one brother kill another brother. All praise is due to Allah. Look, brothers and sisters, these brothers of the El-Rukn, the disciples, the warlords, the village vice lords, they are the hope of the entire black community. All they need is guidance from the cornerstone. Guidance from the Lord. From the Lord to the vice Lord. From from the cornerstone to the Rukn, because they make up the corner. They need the master to teach the disciples. And when that happens, you find the warlords, the vice lords, the Rukn, and the disciples forming an army of protection for the black community. Yes, sir. Look. You see our elderly in here? Our elderly should be able to walk the streets at night without fear for their life. It's the duty of a warlord. It's the duty of an El Rukn. It's the duty of a disciple to look after mother, look after father, and make sure that they're safe, black man and woman. All praises be to Allah. So when you see the elderly walking, go on, young warlord, and take mother by the hand and make her to know you're not there to steal her pocketbook. Tell her, mother, let me help you. And make sure she gets in safe. Yes, sir. That's what a warlord does. That's right. Because the enemies have made war on the black community. That's right. And they want us to make war on each other. They would love to see Bilalians or the members of the American Muslim Mission and followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and other Muslims break out into war. They don't love Islam. They hate Islam. And they would love to see one Muslim cancel out another, one Hebrew cancel out another, one Moorish scientist cancel out another, one gang cancel out another. Then the white man makes it his turf, and he stays the master of the turf. But look, God has come to give you the kingdom. And that's what white folks know. They know that their time to rule you is over. They know that the only way they can kill these youth, keep them in drugs. And their spirit of war make them fight and kill each other. Look at the way they walk. Walk like warriors. Look in their faces. They're hard and tough. That's right. Because the times are hard and tough and don't need no sissy. That's right. Time need tough men and tough women. Right. Everybody can't be a doctor. Right. You that want to be a doctor, go be one. You that want to be a lawyer, go be one. You that want to be a teacher and a scientist and an engineer, you go be that. Right. But there's some of us who want a soldier. Right. There's some of us who just want to be warriors to protect our society, to make sure that no enemy comes in and breaks our peace. And that's why these brothers are valuable. This is a war for greed, for material gain, and to keep people in power who bow down to the will of America. Why should my young black brothers and sisters die for your foolishness?
America has never made black people their vital interest. Never. Mr. Bush is ready to spend $500 billion of the taxpayers' money to bail out the savings and loan industry. But Mr. Bush is not willing to spend any billions of dollars to rebuild the inner cities of America, to provide job opportunities and educational opportunities for black boys and girls. Whether the president charges me with sedition and seeks my death, I cannot stand by and allow the government of America to use black men and women to sustain the vital interests of a nation that doesn't care about us and our interests. If America wants soldiers to die in the Gulf, I say to Mr. Bush, send your son. I say to the Congress, the warmongers in Congress, you send your children. Why should your wicked policies be borne on the backs of black boys and girls, Native American boys and girls, Chicanos, Hispanics, and even poor whites? Why should they bear the burden of the rich and the privileged in America? Let the rich go and fight and die for the rich. What kind of leaders are we that we would let America use our sons and daughters, and we preachers, we politicians will not lift up our voice and say, hell no, never again? You may say, Farrakhan is anti-American. I said Bush is anti-American. I say the government is anti-American. Whenever you have these sick policies that make the American people suffer, and then when a voice rises up that is unafraid to speak the truth, you silence that voice, then you are the real un-Americans.
They used to charge Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and later on Farrakhan with teaching hate. Nobody can teach hate better than the perpetrators of injustice. When you do to people what was done here, it's only a miracle that they don't hate. I can't speak for them. They spoke for themselves, but I speak for God. Now, let me just tell you what God is thinking. Because some of you are too weak to think as you should think, so God is thinking for you today and acting for you because you are too cowardly to act on your own behalf. God in Isaiah speaks. My arm is not too short that it cannot save. He said, I have for a long time holden my peace. Now I shall cry out like a woman in travail. They saw God coming, treading a wine press alone. In the old days when there was a wine press, people would stand in the wine press and tread down upon the grapes, and their garments would be red. He said he was going to tread down the wicked, and his garment would be covered with blood. This milquetoast Jesus that you think you represent. What do you expect from him when he returns? Do you think he's coming to play with birds? Well, hell, if he come to play with birds, we don't need him. We've been crying out for justice. So the book said when he comes, he had a sword in his hand. And his sword was dripping with blood. Cast the sickle and reap. These people and the millions out there, they don't need apologists for the wicked. They need somebody who will raise his or her voice and say to the wicked, your kingdom has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Now, you know, some commentators suggested by my research team that the only time torture occurred in America was during the infamous witch trials in the colony of Massachusetts. Whites make such claims in full confidence that their image of a magnanimous America will survive historical scrutiny. It doesn't. Even this specific egregious act of waterboarding is not a new invention of the U.S. military. The same technique was used to torture black inmates in Georgia prison system 139 years ago. They called it watering then. And it consisted of pouring a stream of water into the mouth of a convict stretched on his back. Much of it got into the lungs, and at best it produced a fit of coughing. Usually they just beat the inmates with whips, but
some particularly sadistic prison officials were creative in devising other forms of terror. The beheadings, now associated with the radical Islamists, were most often used against Indians and known as scalping. Ben Franklin was known to have supplied scalping knives to the settlers at the fort for this purpose, and Massachusetts gave rewards of 5 pounds for an Indian scalp. President Andrew Jackson, the one that's now on the face of your rapidly deteriorating $20 bill, he kept the scalps as souvenirs. Some Jewish settlers recaptured escaped slaves and used their severed hands as trophies. Nat Turner's freedom fighters and many who were not involved in his great 1831 freedom struggle were decapitated, their heads impaled on stakes along the Virginia highways. Ironically, Turner warned his own troops not to torture those whites that stood in the way of their freedom. He was more humane than his own captors. Blacks were subject to the cruelest punishments for acting on their desire for freedom or for the slightest infraction: lynchings, corpse mutilations, beheadings, live burnings, and ritual displaying of amputated body parts was commonplace. There are many recorded cases of impalings of the severed heads of Africans as a warning to other blacks. Whippings were cruel and sadistic, resulting in acute blood loss, shock, and infection, and were often fatal, right here in America. One former slave wrote of having witnessed a black man being forced to whip his own mother to death. Blacks were suspended by their wrists or stretched across the ground before a cowhide or paddle beating. These bloody, flesh-gouging floggings would sometimes last for hours, consisting of hundreds of lashings before mustard, cayenne, salt, or turpentine would be applied to prolong the torture. But we don't torture in America. See, you cannot tell that to black people. You cannot tell that to us who have been in your jails and in your prisons and been beaten down on the streets and burned at the stake and lynched. You can't tell us that. Boy, this is something. Do you know there were other tortures used on our people? If this is too much for you, I can understand. See? But the book says you shall know what? And the truth shall. So don't be afraid of the truth. Oh, but it's so harsh. We're trying to forget that. But remember, my brother, see, the Jewish people that you admire, they don't forget. They say never, never again. And they are right. But we forget. We don't teach our children what we've been through to get to this day. Preachers don't preach it. Teachers don't teach it. Mom and dad too busy looking at reality television and blinded to the reality of the suffering of our people.
The movement started in the 60s, a powerful movement. It hit the churches with Martin Luther King, with H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, James Farmer, James Foreman. It hit the literary field. It struck our artists. And Eartha Kitt began to speak boldly. Our artists began to challenge white folks, even in the White House. All of a sudden, a movement had caught on, and everybody that was a Negro just a few years ago began to talk about black and blackness. A movement, a genuine movement had begun. But notice, Martin Luther King was on one side preaching integration. Malcolm and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad were on the other side preaching separation. The church joined the integration movement, but the integration movement was spawned by white folk.
Listen.
They recognized that you were on the rise, and they did not want you to gravitate toward any separatist movement. So the bourgeois intellectual element, like a true slave, always wants to be included in the master's domain. They never want to go out and go for themselves, even though it may bring a future for their people. They decided, we're going to get into the mainstream of white American life. And dear brother Martin Luther King, many of you who watched them on television saw him marching. You saw him close down that bus company in Montgomery. You saw him march from Selma. You saw white folks put fire hose on them, sick dogs on them, cattle prod them, put the women in jail, rape them, beat them. Is that right?
That's right.
And many of us were children, or you were children, I'm just including myself with you. We're sitting back looking at TV. You saw them being hit with fire hoses, and little babies said, never me. You're saying, fight, man, why don't you fight? This is what you're saying behind the TV. You go out on the corner with your reefer hanging out your mouth. I think, man, them niggas is crazy. Nigga hit me on my cheek, Jim. I'm gonna take his whole head. Now look, brother, this is spawning now another kind of thought. Here's integration on one side, separation on another, and coming up in between is revolution. Just look at it, brother. You can't say, I don't like Malcolm, I like Elijah. Or I don't like Dr. King, I like Malcolm. You got to look at the whole thing. And the whole thing says every one of them made a contribution to where we stand right now. There are finer details that we can get into at another time to deal with who did what, when, and why. Because history affords us the golden opportunity to look back on men's lives and see mistakes, while men who live their lives cannot see from your vantage point. And that's why the legacy of greatness is always left to history to give you and not for you to give yourself. Hold on. Everybody with me? Let's move this to its conclusion. Now, Martin Luther King, he said he would wear down white folk with love.
He was going to overpower their hate with his love. These are his words. He didn't want to be the brother-in-law of white folks, meaning he didn't want the law to make us brothers. He wanted us and white folk to truly be brothers. And I'm sure that's the sentiment of a lot of you. But the question is, can you do it? We're going to deal with that. We've got to deal with it. Because we don't want to waste time searching for things that don't exist. That's right. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. Now here's Dr. King over here, Malcolm over here, Elijah Muhammad. Now Malcolm breaks from Elijah Muhammad. And he moves away from Elijah Muhammad into what is called Orthodox Islam. And then Malcolm spawns a revolutionary movement. Now you've got the separatists, the integrationists, and the revolutionists. Boy. Then you have the Panther Party coming up.
All right.
That's a marvelous movement of young black brothers and sisters. You may not have soldiered with the Panthers, but recognize what they meant to us. Young black men standing there with rifles. And they look mean, brother. They didn't look like they ever smiled. Fred Hampton, Mark Clark. Just look at the cream of young black revolutionary crop. The Soledad brothers. This is the finest young black men that we produced.
That's right.
They didn't die in vain, beloved. They died that they could leave to us the legacy of their struggle, that we may study their struggle and extract from it the principles that we're going to use in the 80s. Because the 80s promise great things for those who are wise. But it promises death for those who are foolish.
That's right.
So, well, even wise men die, but they don't die the death of a fool.
That's right.
A fool is dead before he dies. So he dies twice. I'll explain that at a later time. But let's move on. Now look, beloved, white folks sitting here watching this thing. Martin Luther King now sees that he was a Negro leader. Martin Luther King looks over at Vietnam. He says, uh-oh. He says, the same people that are oppressing my people here are oppressing the Vietnamese there. Martin Luther King steps out of a safe Negro position into a sure enough dangerous position, even like Peter getting out of the boat, trying to walk on the water, brother. Martin Luther King stepped out and condemned America's policy in Vietnam. Now look, brother and sister, you may not appreciate what Martin Luther King did, but the man made a step that said our struggle is not national. Our struggle is international, and our struggle is not just tied to us, but it's tied into every oppressed people on the earth. So he was helping to broaden our vision, broaden our horizon. Not that Marcus Garvey didn't say this 30 years earlier, not that Elijah Muhammad didn't say it, but for Martin Luther King to say it from the position that he had once took. This was indeed revolutionary, and the government said something has to happen to this man. The government said, and I repeat, the government said, and the government of America has been the #1 destroyer of every meaningful black man and woman who would lead us to freedom, justice, and equality. just look at the government laughing at Dr. King and plotting against him at the same time. Now that's not the act of a righteous person. That's the act of a devil. Lyndon Johnson, the Kennedy brothers, smiling with poor Dr. King, but bugging his hotel room, watching everything he does, coming up with a tape of something in his private life, threatening him. Hoover sends for him, threatens him. They want to break him now, break his spirit, because they made him a great and famous man. Notice, they made him. White folks make Negro leaders. Not that Dr. King didn't have the stuff, but he was more safe to be made than Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, or Elijah Muhammad. So they pushed Martin Luther King because he was teaching love for everybody. And that's what white folks want. They want you to love everybody to your detriment when they know it is impossible. How can you love that which is diametrically opposed, actively involved in the destruction of you and your people? How can you do what God Himself cannot do? Almighty God, in the Bible and in the Quran, He deals with His enemies. Hitler never killed as much as Allah. Go ahead, brother. Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, Tamerlane, put them all together. They don't kill like the great God. But when He kills, don't nobody call God a killer. He drown them out, flood them out, tornado them out, earthquake them out. He killed men, women, and children. When He gets tired of their foolishness, He deals with them. And they call it an act of God. And then everybody settle down praying. Talk, brother. Because whenever God does it, He's justified. I'm coming to something.
I hear you.
I'm coming to something. Poor Martin Luther King. He was caught in a bind. But look at the strength of that man's character. He was leading an integration movement. He began to see white folks don't want us. He began to see that his love wasn't going to wear them down. He had a meeting with Elijah Muhammad in Chicago. He and Sister Coretta Scott King, they met with Elijah Muhammad. Two men from Georgia, sitting down together, breaking bread, talking it over, cutting it up. White folks knew they was in trouble. Now look, Malcolm X had been killed. We were blamed for his murder. I don't say that Muslims did not have a desire to hurt Malcolm. I wouldn't say that, because that would be untruth. Because Malcolm had begun to say some things about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that inflamed the Muslim community, but white folks moved on that. This is why, brothers and sisters, when we don't like each other, for whatever the reason is, we have to be very careful about the public positions that we take. Because whenever we meet, the enemy meets with us. And they exploit our differences. And they exploited the dislike between the followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and those who left the nation with Brother Malcolm. And then Malcolm was assassinated, and two innocent men right now have been in prison for 17 or more years for a crime that they did not commit. One man admits he was a part of it and exonerated the other two in the trial, but they wanted to show conspiracy. So if one is guilty, link them all together, tie it into Elijah Muhammad, tie it into the nation, to use it to make black people hate Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam.
That's right. That's right.
And let me tell you, after Malcolm's assassination, those of us who followed Elijah Muhammad, we had a hard time. I mean, we try to sell a newspaper. People say, man, get that so-and-so paper out of our face. Killers, you murdered Malcolm. And there's a lot of hatred that exists right now.
That's right.
Because they don't ever intend to clear it up.
No.
They intend to exacerbate it wherever they can.
Right.
All right, now look, I'm coming to the close of these points. Beloved brothers and sisters, now Malcolm was out of the way. His movement began to die because he had not developed his new direction. The revolutionary movement of the Panther Party, they had infiltrated it so till they were about to just destroy it. But there was Martin Luther King. And when they said that they were going to send a tape to Martin Luther King's wife of some activities of Dr. King, Dr. King would not buckle to white male. Dr. King said, whatever you're going to do, you go ahead and do it, but I'm going to stand, and the Poor People's March is going on. And when they brought our brother to Memphis, you read all the surrounding stories, those written by some of our brilliant brothers, among them, of course, Dick Gregory, who's a very brilliant man and not a comedian by any stretch of the imagination. They know that there was government involvement, but they gloss it over. Dr. King's killed, and black folk erupt. In over 30 cities, we start burning as though we're under the command of a masterful general who sent a word into 30 to 40 cities to say, burn it down. I mean, this shook up America, brothers and sisters. 30 to 40 cities on fire, and this one is not connected to that one. They just burn it.
Burn.
Look, you may not have analyzed it, but white folks did. All our leaders in sports and entertainment locked down by a wicked cabal of bloodsuckers of the talent and vitality and strength of those who could make a difference. Now you can call that anti-Semitism if you want, but I call it truth of some bloodsuckers that won't let my people go free. You think these artists that make all this money are free men and women? They're minstrels from a plantation. All your black sports figures are pieces of meat bought and sold but not free. Black newspapers enslaved. Black magazines enslaved. Black radio stations enslaved, black television enslaved. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about.
the liquor companies, the tobacco companies that are feeding death into our communities control all black publications. I opened the black weekly newspaper here. It's our voice. It's all we got. But the centerfold is white food merchants. If they threaten to pull that ad out, you can't even print next week on your doggone circulation. You're not free. Riding into the black community in a Mercedes-Benz or BMW, living in a fine mansion don't make you free. You just a dressed up nigger on the plantation. College presidents aren't free. Your college president here is not a free man. They want to be free, but they're slaves. PhD slaves. Going to Raleigh, begging for crumbs from the master's table so they can get a new building here and a new building there. Why the hell are we in this sweat box? With all the money that North Carolina Central, all the dignity that North Carolina Central has brought to this state, you should be able to have an air-conditioned gymnasium. You're not free. And the worst part about it is you love being the slave that you are. You don't want to be free. Because in order to be free, you're going to have to take a bold step and your enemy may come out against you. But I say, let's bring him out. He can't win if we're together.
But I want you to put 5 cents away in a national savings program. Look at our children now being taught the value of saving and investing. We must start teaching the babies and begin to regenerate a culture of purposeful saving and investing. This is what Jewish people teach their children. This is what the Indians from the subcontinent of India teach their children. This is what the Chinese and the Koreans and others teach their children. So we must start. Look at what we've already done with the nation's economic program. Small, but it's a beginning. We bought back 1,600 acres of our farm in Georgia in 1991. We became the largest black-owned and operated farm in South Georgia. We transformed worn-out, weed-infested, hard rock clay land into arable land and workable soil and brought back many of the birds and wildlife. We purchased over $250,000 worth of farm equipment and trucks. We have our own flour mill and commercial sifter. We can produce 800 pounds of flour in an 8-hour day, and we produce the best tasting watermelons in the country, so we are told. On a yearly basis, we produce 8,000 pounds of flour, 400,000 pounds of watermelon, 12,000 pounds of different vegetables, 100,000 pounds of wheat, 100,000 pounds of field corn, and 200,000 pounds of peanuts. We deliver produce to 8 states, whole wheat flour and other goods to 35 cities, and we have provided jobs in the area. That is what our farm managers, Dr. Ridgely Muhammad and his wife, Sister Ann, are doing on just 1,600 acres of land. Where's Muhammad? Where's my brother? Black people may not think we are able to govern. So when you talk about going somewhere where it's all us, that might terrify them more than living under both of them flags. Because some of them tried living under us in church and mosque and synagogue. They ain't too happy. So there's something that we have to prove that we can govern ourselves. Look at what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said. We have enough technicians, such as mathematicians, construction engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, physicists, chemists, educators, agriculturalists, navigators, and aeronauts among the nearly 50 million of us. You will find scholars or scientists whom we can use in every branch of government. Then there are our own independent people outside of this country who would be glad to help us get going in a country or state for ourselves. Now, we do not expect to build, nor do we desire to build a government patterned after the order of the white race. Naturally, we would need help for the next 20 to 25 years. After that, we would be self-supporting. The spirit of doing for self is now coming into our people, but they only need a new education of self and others. Now, let's stay there for a minute. We must recognize that we are living under colonial status. What is a colony? It's a separate condition where there's an aggregate of people with similar language, culture, history, but they're controlled from the outside. The black community is controlled from the outside. And they control the black community by politicians, preachers, and business people who will sell out our people for favor with the people of power that want to control the black community. Now, we've got to start somewhere. So if they're not going to give us some states that we can call our own, we have to take control of where we live. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad writes, "What more do we need but unity of the whole for the whole?" But what actually is preventing this unity of nearly 50 million or more of us is the ignorance and foolish love and fear of our enemies in the professional and leadership class of this people of nearly 50 million up from slavery. Now, if you're in a profession, doctor, lawyer, teacher, all these professions, how do you feel about not you doing good in your business? How do you feel about our control of where we live? That the politics of it is controlled by us. The education of it is controlled by us. The economics of it is controlled by us. We can do this. Now listen, if the white man is upset, why would you be? We're not trying to control your neighborhood, but we must control ours. Now, there may not be a big Chinatown in Atlanta, I don't know, or a big Koreatown, I don't know. But I know in New York, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in LA, in Houston, oh, they got a Chinatown. How many Chinese politicians are in Congress? Hey, none. How about in the city council? None. Hey, but they're happy. Why they happy? Because they control the economics, the politics, the education, and own the territory where they live. So in the Declaration of Independence it says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
Joe.
Blacula.